Hey, welcome to Restoration. Welcome, Church Online. My name is Jason Soderstrom. I'm the lead pastor. I'm also a millennial. Thank you. The millennial generation ushered in a lot of things for you guys, all right? We brought Facebook to the world. I got the email invite to my college email address, one of the first users of Facebook. We brought you wonderful music. I could list them all day, but one of the greatest bands of all time, Creed. That was us. They were at Fiddler's Green last night. We also brought you romantic comedies. I mean, there's so many rom-coms of all of the millennial generation. Most people say, like, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days was the greatest rom-com of all time. I don't believe that's true. I think the millennial generation best rom-com is 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. I relate more to Adam Sandler than Matthew McConaughey. Why are you guys laughing at that? So hard. I'm going to spoil this movie for you because it's been 20 years, and if you've yet to watch it, shame on you. It's your fault, all right? So you have Adam Sandler, who plays Henry, and you have Drew Barrymore, who is Lucy. Lucy has a terrible car accident and loses her short-term memory, meaning she has amnesia. And every day she forgets yesterday. And so Henry, Adam Sandler, he interacts with Lucy and falls in love with this girl. And then he finds out she loses her memory every day. So every single day, he has to make her fall back in love with him. Hence the name, 50 First Dates. And at the very end of the movie, what happens? You have like this scene where Lucy wakes up and she's on this boat, and then there's this, like, she has a baby, and they're out in this amazing adventure. And if you didn't cry in this moment when all the videos show, like, Henry had made this video to tell Lucy, to remind her of her love for him and their new life together. If you didn't cry in that moment, I don't know what is wrong with you. But amnesia made Lucy forget her love for Henry. She needed to be reminded every single day. This, I believe, is true for us with our relationship with God. It is so easy for us to have spiritual amnesia where we forget our love for God, we forget what He has done for us, we forget all His faithfulness and all His love. And we, as followers of Jesus, we need to be reminded every single day of His love for you. So today, here's what I want to do is I want to help you prevent spiritual amnesia from entering your life. Here's how I define spiritual amnesia. Spiritual amnesia is forgetting what God has done in the past when you don't get what you want in the present. It's forgetting what He's done when you're frustrated with life circumstances. And this forgetfulness, what it will do is it will rob you of your joy and it will undermine your trust in God. Life can have so many difficult situations, can't it? We can be weighed down by those circumstances, and we're so in the moment with each one of those circumstances that we forget so quickly all that God has done. As we've been studying the book of Exodus, what I want to show you is Israel in this moment in Exodus 16 is fighting spiritual amnesia. They have quickly forgotten how good God is in their life. So, Moses, he was brought to the people as the deliverer, and he pulls the people through God's help, through plagues. Pharaoh finally lets go of the people. And as the people are released, they go out, and then the armies of Pharaoh are following the people. And they get surrounded by this army, and God's presence is with them. And Billy talked about this last week, and they're overwhelmed. Yet God does a miracle, and He opens up the Red Sea. And they were able to walk through it. And eventually, the Red Sea closes on Pharaoh and the armies, completing complete destruction. They had seen miracle after miracle after miracle in their lives. And then, this is what they said at the very end after they crossed the Red Sea. It said this: "And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they put their trust in Him and in Moses, His servant." They had all this trust in God. God had done all these amazing things. And so they're like, yeah, we trust God. We trust Moses. And then they go into what is called the desert, or the wandering, where they're headed to the promised land. And where we're going to pick up today in Exodus 16 is 30 days past the Red Sea. What is happening? Where is the heart of the Israelites in this moment? And it's in Exodus 16:2. This is what's going on in Israel. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt." Chill out, guys. This is like so dramatic. Only we died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There were set pots of meat and we ate all the food we wanted, but you brought us out in the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Like, they have totally forgotten. God sent all those plagues. God then like gave them all the riches of Egypt to take with them. He opened the Red Sea, and 30 days later, they're going, "We wish we were still in Egypt as slaves. At least we had food there, Moses." You're like, come on, can't you remember back to what God has done? You've totally forgotten what God's done. I want to point to your attention. How does this start? It says, in the desert, the whole community grumbled. They grumbled against God. Our key idea today is spiritual amnesia always starts when you grumble against God. This was the initial reaction to God, is to complain, to murmur. Grumbling is the first sign of spiritual amnesia in your life. When we forget what God has done and we start focusing on, we shift our focus from gratitude to like dissatisfaction, what that will do is it erodes your faith. You are blinded. You have amnesia to the goodness and greatness of God, what he's done, his faithfulness in your life. We so quickly forget. Grumbling always is an indicator of a dysfunctional view of God. When you grumble, it's always an indicator. When you grumble, you don't view God in the appropriate life. This is exactly where Israel's at. And Israel was like amazing at grumbling. Exodus 2, they were grumbling towards God because they were enslaved by the Egyptians. And so God listens to their grumbling and gives them Moses. And then they start grumbling in Exodus 5 when Moses comes on the scene and tells Pharaoh to let the people go, and then he makes them work harder and he doesn't give straw for the bricks. They start grumbling. They started grumbling a chapter before this in Exodus 15. They don't have water, so they're grumble. But this grumbling in Exodus 16 is a little different because it says this. There's a key word of a description. It says that the whole community grumbled. It wasn't just a few people. All 2 million people grumbled against God. Isn't that crazy? I always forget, like when I think of this whole scene, I forget that there's 2 million Israelites in the desert. Like, that is crazy to think about. That's over double of Denver. I mean, like, you can't even fathom like that amount of people in the desert. Actually, you can fathom it. Imagine I-70 last weekend on Labor Day. It's 2 million people right there. All these people start grumbling, and it says that the grumbling actually impacts the whole community. Grumbling, complaining, is one of the most contagious things we can do. You have seen this if you have kids and you go on vacation. If one person in the family starts to grumble, what happens? Grumbling goes through the whole family. You can take a great day and it can go really bad really quick. So the entire community was grumbling against God. This is why it is so important for you and I to identify when we are grumbling, because it will impact everyone you come into contact with. If you grumble, if you complain, it will impact your family. It will impact your life. And I want to propose, it actually will destroy your faith. Grumbling will destroy your faith. This is like the very first thing that is going to destroy Israel, is the start of grumbling. Before I tell you though how it will destroy your faith, first I want to tell you what I am not saying. Here's what I'm not saying. You can't be honest before God. You need to be honest before God. Like, there is a need to express your emotion, to express your hardship. When life's circumstances are not how you want it, it is okay to talk to God about it. But there is a difference between grumbling and honesty. There's a difference. Grumbling is this. Grumbling says, it must be accomplished my way. Honesty says, it must be accomplished God's way. Grumbling is under your breath. It's a murmur. It's like, it always stays with you. It never leaves you. What honesty before God looks like is you go, it's off my desk and on God's desk. Like, I don't hold on to it anymore. I have this frustration. I have this hurt. I have this pain, whatever it is. I'm going to take that and I'm going to give it to God. Grumbling, the fruit of grumbling is being frustrated. When you're frustrated, when you're angry, that's the fruit of grumbling. The fruit of honesty before God is peace. It's the fruit of the Spirit. So the question should be, how are we to be honest before God and also prevent us from grumbling? I believe we should take a kind of a look into the life of David. Like, he would always approach God. I love David because he was so real with God. He wasn't like sugarcoating it. He was talking about his emotions and his problems. Yet at the very end of every one of David's complaints or frustrations or hardships, he would always go back to the character of God, what is true about God and God's goodness. We see it in Psalm 13, 1 through 6. It says this, "How long, Lord, will you forget me? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" But then he ends the chapter like this, "I will sing the Lord's praises, for he has been good to me." David shares his honest heart before God, but he always comes back to the true nature of God and that God is good. Grumbling will blame God. Honesty trusts God. So I think if I were to survey all of you, should you be a grumbler? Should you be a complainer? Is this good for your life? You're probably like, no, not really. I don't want to be that. But I still don't think you think how severe this problem is and how it will destroy your faith and destroy your life. Here's what I want to do. I want you to look forward ahead. Have you ever met okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to generalize some old people in the room. I'm going to say they're 100 years old so I don't get in trouble with any person in here for ageism. But have you ever met a 100-year-old that is really joyous and really happy, but you always see the opposite, like it's like the extreme opposite? There's only two types of really old people: really joyous people and what? Grumpy, grumbling, miserable people. And the older they get, it feels like the more grumpy and grumbling they get. Joyous older people, they're amazing to be around. They're humble, they're caring. I mean, when I get to share my heart with someone that is just joyous, that's lived a lot of life, it actually means more to me than most conversations I have. Yet, when I meet a grumbler, a grumpy person, I'm like, nothing will ever satisfy you. You are going to go to your deathbed frustrated at the world, and you keep getting frustrated over and over again. And if you ever met that person and you're like, how did you get there? Like, why are you like this? What happened to you? Here's what I can tell you. It didn't happen yesterday. It didn't happen last week. It didn't happen a month ago. It happened 40, 50, 60 years ago. They started to live a life of grumbling, because grumbling is compounding. It's like compound interest. The more you do it, the more it will take over your life and multiply. So wherever you're at in your life, if you're 20 to 60 years old, 70 years old, wherever you're at in your life, you need to decide, what do I want to be when I'm on my deathbed? Because you are making the decisions. Am I going to be a grumbling person for the rest of my life, or do I want to be a joyous person? So my question for you is this: have you found yourself in a state of grumbling or complaining recently? Is it overtaking your life? Maybe it's not all the time. Maybe it's just like here and there, but it just feels like it keeps coming up. Grumbling is a check engine light for all of us. Don't ignore it. If you keep ignoring it, your life will end up grumpy and miserable. For me, a few weeks ago, I I was just wrestling with some hard things. Like I had some hard relationship issues where friendships got kind of like some people said some things that affected me and I was really frustrated about it. And then also like I have a family member that was having a ton of health issues and I was like doing all the things. I'm like seeking the Lord. I'm asking God, and especially with my family member that has a health issue, I'm begging God for healing of this person. I'm asking God, I'm doing everything I can. And finally I just hit a point one night. I'm like, God, where are you? Why won't you answer me? Like, I'm doing everything. I'm trying my best. I'm praying. I'm fasting. I'm doing all the things you call me to do, yet you will not answer my prayer. Why? And in that moment, my heart started just becoming really hard towards God because I started to blame him for all the things that were happening in my circumstance. And I took my eyes off the true nature of God. I almost started condemning God. And that's where honesty turns into grumbling. And my heart was an accusation towards God. You owe me. There was no reliance on his character. There was no going back in my heart like, oh, you're so good, God. You're so good. For 24 hours, I stuck in this like misery. And finally, God like softened my heart and I opened up my hands and I just repented. I go, God, I was complaining and I was grumbling towards your character. You are good, even if you don't listen to what I think is best. I believe you know what is best. What I find interesting about grumbling is you can always build a logical case for it, can't you? You're like, well, I deserve it. Like, you owe me on this. Like, we always can have the logical case on grumbling, yet it's always easier to grumble against God than to trust God. The Israelites are grumbling, and here's how God answers them. So let's go back into the story. Remember, the whole community's grumbling. We need food, and here's what God says. He says, then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down from heaven for you bread, and the people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. And this I will test them and see whether they follow my instructions. So rather than punish their grumbling, God is so gracious. If you want to see God's grace in the Old Testament, a lot of people are like, was God gracious in the Old Testament? He gives them something they do not deserve. He goes, I'm going to give you bread and I'm going to give you quail. And he's testing them to see if they will follow him, if they will trust him when he comes through with them to them again. Then it goes on to say in verse 8, Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you the meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against God. What is so interesting in this passage is it says, how much bread did God give them? All. So every morning he gave them as much bread as they wanted. He was a God of abundance. God is a provider. He goes, I'm going to give you everything. It may have not been what they wanted, but he was going to abundantly provide for them. And then he goes on to say that like, when you're grumbling, when you're complaining, you're actually not complaining against Aaron and I. You're complaining against God. Did you know that? No matter what we do, whenever we complain or grumble, even if it's against someone else, it's actually not against that person. There's a higher authority. There's a higher power. It's against God. Grumbling is not just a response to a circumstance, but it's a response to God himself. We're going, God, why are you doing this? Stop doing this. I don't want this. We're making a judgment about God's will and his character through our grumbling. Grumbling is nothing more than an external expression of our internal being. It's nothing more than an expression of our internal being. Grumbling is a heart that says, I know better. Like, I know better than God. If only he would just follow my plan, life would be so much better. So it puts us in a place where we actually start trusting ourselves and we can become God in our lives. You do not want to be God. The rest of the world, we all don't want you to be God either. I promise you. None of you should be God. Yet, when we grumble, when we complain, we place ourselves on his seat. This is why I believe grumbling will destroy your faith completely. Israel is in spiritual amnesia They're trusting in themselves and not God, and they start grumbling. And when we look back to the story of Israel, we start seeing Pharaoh had this really hard heart towards God. You read about Pharaoh, why don't you listen? You saw this plague and this plague and this plague. It said he had a hard heart towards God. What we learn from this story is maybe, just maybe, the Israelites have the same heart as Pharaoh. They have a hard heart towards God and an unwillingness to depend on him for everything. So if spiritual amnesia is caused by grumbling, what I want to do for the last few moments of our time is I just want to share you the antidote to spiritual amnesia, and it is to make a shift from grumbling to gratitude. You have to move from grumbling about life to a gratitude in life. And the first way we do that is just to make a daily choice. We all have to make a daily choice of gratitude. This is what's going to happen with Israel. They made this request, and now they must choose to follow God's provision every single day. So we pick back up in our story in verse 11. It says this. The Lord said to Moses, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you'll be filled with the bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening, quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. This was the first incident of frosted flakes in the Bible. And the Israelites said, they're great. So when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses, and they kept part of it until morning. But it was full of maggots and began to smell, so Moses was angry with them. So God is providing right here. He's going to give quail at night and manna during the morning to nourish them physically. But I think it's more than just nourish them physically. I think it is to help them be nourished spiritually. To go, where does this come from? What am I going to depend on? How will we have food today? It has to come from God. My dependence is on God. And as they eat the manna, they remember where it comes from. Jesus made a comment that he is the bread of life and that we should eat of his words, meaning all nourishment, spiritually, physically, everything comes from the word of God when we consume it, knowing that every good and great gift is from him above. God gives the Israelites what they need every single day. He gives them all this quail. 2 million people eating quail. Just start adding up the numbers. That's a lot of quail. I don't know what they did with all the feathers. Actually, never thought about that till just now. Sorry. Literally never thought about it. Then they have manna every single morning as much as they want. It nourishes them, and they have to choose every day to be grateful for God. They have to depend on him. And if they try to save any, it just wastes away. It goes stale. Maggots get into it. They have to have a daily choice. They make a daily choice to be grateful to God, to depend on him. Lamentations 3 says it this way. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Aren't you glad for mornings? You ever had a really bad day and you just go, I need to go to bed because I need new mercies. God says he will give you new mercies every single morning. Last night, I went to bed kind of grumpy, a little frustrated, and I was laughing. I got to preach this message in the morning. I was like, thank God for mornings. The CU game didn't help either, but lots of grumbling. I'm so thankful for mornings. Whenever you've just had a bad day, isn't it great that God gives you a new day? And it says every day he wants to give you new mercies, meaning we get to run to him, we get to go to him, and he wants our dependence to be on him. So when we have a grateful heart that comes to him every single day, he gives us new mercies. A daily gratitude will lead you to a daily reliance on God. A daily grumbling will lead you to a daily resistance towards God. You have a choice every day. Do you want to go towards God or do you want to go against God? Am I going to be a grateful heart? Am I going to make a choice for everything I have today? I'm just going to be grateful for it. What I've found in my own life is this, that I have never been happy in my life when I'm grumbling. Has there ever been a time in your life where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. You're complaining, and then all of a sudden joy and happiness come out of you immediately? No, they don't work together. I got the last few summers, I've got the privilege of meeting one of my great friends. His name is Bill Betts. He owns a fishing lodge in Alaska. It's fly fishing lodge. And he's invited me out the last couple of years. I got to go help him on the lodge and see life out there. And it is in the middle of nowhere. This is me and Bill. This is the lodge up here. I've helped him on the roofing. We've done some work on that, done some work on this deck here. Bill does everything at the lodge. And when I think of Bill's life, I'm like, it's the coolest life ever. You take people fly fishing, you're in the bush of Alaska, but then you got to start thinking, and I watch Bill's life, I'm like, he has all these customers coming in, and the only way to get to that lodge is to fly in that float plane there. And he has electricity, he has plumbing, he has fresh water, he has heat and air. He actually has a sauna and a hot tub. Yet there is no electricity and water going to that place. He had to do it all himself. And so it seems like, oh, it's so beautiful, it's be so awesome. Yet there's so much stress in his life. And he does everything. He's the mechanic, he's the medic, he's the electrician, he's the plumber, he's the boat captain. That's halibut that we ate out on the ocean until the tides raise. He tries to not let people die. I mean, he's doing all this work. He doesn't sleep at all. He averages literally 3 to 4 hours of sleep for the entire fishing season. I've seen him go 48 hours without sleep. And you know what I've never heard come out of Bill Betts' mouth? A complaint. I'm like, how do you not grumble? How do you not complain? This is so hard. This is really hard work. I attribute it to his daily dependence on God. Every morning at 6 a.m. at the lodge, it's not a Christian lodge, he has a 15-minute devotion that he invites all the guests and all his employees to come to, and they sit and they talk about all the things they're grateful for and read God's word. And what's great is about halfway through the week, a lot of the non-Christians start seeing Bill's attitude, and they start coming to this little devotional. Bill has a grateful heart towards God. He does not complain. He does not get frustrated. He daily practices gratitude and reliance on God, and it keeps him joyful. In this passage, remember what happens to the bread? In one day, what happens? Maggots get in and it's stale. Meaning, you can't live on yesterday's manna. You can't eat it. You can't go, oh, I read the scriptures last week or yesterday. No, Bill, every single day, he's like, I need more of God. I need to be grateful to God today. I have to choose it today. So I want to encourage you, do you have a daily rhythm that you can cultivate in your life where you're grateful? Where you come to God and you just list out the things you're grateful for. Maybe it's in the mornings. You just need to wake up and you need to say a prayer and you need to just say 1 minute, get on your knees and just go, God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for this and this, and go on your day. It'll create in you a heart of gratitude. Or maybe it's in the evenings. You just need to take a journal and you need to write in your journal all the things that God has done that day of the goodness of God. We try to practice this as a family. Once a week or so, we try to have at least one family meal together, and we try to just have this practice. We do what we call the highs, lows, and buffaloes. Highs are all the wins of the week, or the day, everything we're daily grateful for. We're like, hey, what was good today? What are you grateful to God for? Lows are just things that happen that maybe we need to pray for. My kids always, if someone says, I don't have a low, they go, no, low, let's go. And then the buffalo is just random stuff. I randomly saw this thing on the side of the highway, or I saw this kid, I don't know, spit a quarter mile in the wind. I don't know what it is. Whatever they thought was interesting that day. Lots of fun things at buffaloes. But what we're doing in that moment is we're actually going, God is so good, isn't he? Every single day, you can be grateful to God. So we must make a choice daily to be grateful. The second way that we move from grumbling to gratitude is we just need to remember his past provision. Where God was faithful in the past. What he's done when we felt like the cards were stacked against us and we could not make it anymore, that God was there. The rest of this passage is so wild, I think. So it goes on and talks about like how there's this Sabbath and like God gives them twice as much on one day so they can eat during the Sabbath. And then this part of the passage in verse 32, I just think is so interesting. It says this: Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna," which is about 4 quarts of manna, "and keep it for generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt." So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for generations to come." So God commands Moses, like, this manna spoiled in one day. Now he goes, you're going to take some of this manna, and it's not going to spoil for generations to come. You're going to put it in a jar. You're going to set it before the people, and the people will always remember that I provided in the wilderness. Like, I was the one when you didn't have food that you need to run to. Like, when your hardest times, you need to put that before you and go, God is my provider. God is my provider. Look at that jar and go, God is my provider. What I think is wild about this passage, most scholars say this jar was given to Moses at 1446 BC. The jar last reported was with the Ark of the Covenant, because it's set before the Ark of the Covenant for people to see for generations to come, and was lost at 586 BC. 900 years, manna stayed good to show the people that God was with them, that he was faithful, that he was the provider. And they were to look at that jar and they were to say, God provided. I think each one of us needs a physical jar. Like, actually something. This is a physical thing where you go, God did a work in my life, and I see it over and over again, and I remember his provision for me. My question for you is this: do you have a jar? Do you have something that physically reminds you of God's faithfulness to you? And then what's in the jar? For my family and I, this is our jar. Every Thanksgiving, we call it Thanksgiving box. We take about an hour and we read through all the cards. For the last years, we've placed multiple cards in here, note cards of things that God has done in our lives that we don't want to forget, that we want to remember his provision in the good and the hard times. We read the cards, and then we make more cards. Before you give me any credit, Molly came up with all of this. So every Thanksgiving we open up, and here's one of our cards. When we read it, it reminds us. This is in 2016. We thought we couldn't have another child. For the last 18 months, we have prayed for Molly to get pregnant. God spoke to Molly, and he told her we would have a girl. You gave her a word, and it was that you make beauty from ashes and give strength to the despair. August 20th, 2016, Eden Rose Soderstrom was born, and your promise was fulfilled. And Eden came into the world. So every time I see my daughter Eden, every time I see this box up on our shelf, every time I give her a hug, I'm reminded of God's faithfulness. When I'm going through really hard times, I remember his provision when I thought there was no way. What's in your jar? Do you have something that would remind you of God's faithfulness and his goodness to you? Each of us have something. For some of you, you've been grumbling a little too much recently. It's maybe the first thing out of your mouth is just hardship, and it's not gratitude towards God. Have you forgotten what God has done for you? That he's been there for you? Have you forgotten his love? Do you need to be filled with gratitude again? See, we are so prone to forget, so prone not to remember. Some of you have forgotten what God did for you years ago. Life has brought some major difficulties in your life, and you've been running from God for years because of that difficult situation. Maybe it was a family member that betrayed you. Maybe it was a bad experience with the church. Maybe it was a relationship. Whatever it was, you've been running. Or maybe you just chose on your own to live for your own path in your own ways, and you've been going after the ways of this world and giving yourself to sin, and you forgot God. Today, can I tell you this? You may have forgotten him, but he has not forgotten you. He has not forgotten you, and he will never forget you. In Hebrews, it says this: never will I leave you, and never will I forsake you. We might forget. We are prone to wonder. We are prone to forget the goodness of God, but he will never, ever leave you. The greatest act of love the world has ever seen was that of Jesus Christ dying on the cross. He died for you. He loves you. He gave his life for your life. He raised again to prove that he was God. And now we can have a heart of gratitude no matter our circumstance, because your name, if you trust in him, is written in the Lamb's book of life. You have a relationship with him. You know that you will be with him forever. You know that he will always be there for you. And if you're here today and you don't know that, if you've never made him Lord over your life, today is the day. Don't run away anymore. Don't live your life grumbling. You'll never be satisfied. Live your life with a heart of gratitude for Jesus Christ, for the Savior of this world. So I want to go ahead and we're going to do something a little bit different. I want to go ahead and move into our time of communion. And as we take communion, I've asked Camille and Donnie just to kind of like sing a song over us as we take communion. And throughout this song, what I want to encourage you is just take communion and try to remember what God's done for you. Maybe you're here with a friend, maybe you're here with a loved one, whoever it is. Maybe you just need to put your arm around them and pray and thank God for the goodness and gratefulness that is in your heart for the things he has done in the past. And so I want to invite our communion servers forward, and every week at Restoration, we take communion. We go down this aisle, and we exit out that way. All our bread is gluten-free, and you can take the bread and dip it in the juice. And if you need prayer today, I'd love to pray for you. I'll be in the back also with a team. So as we remember the goodness of God, we remember on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took this bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body given for you. Take, eat, and what? Remember." Remember. And then on that same night, he took the cup and he said, "This cup represents my blood shed for the forgiveness of each of your sins. Take, drink, and remember." Would you stand? Would you take communion with us? And let's remember God's faithfulness.